On today's episode of Locked On Suns, the Phoenix Suns season is just about over. After a Game 3 loss on Friday night to the Minnesota Timberwolves, it can seem complicated with all the scheme and adjustment talk we do during the playoffs. But let's talk about why, in this series, it's actually pretty simple why the Suns have gotten known so far.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Happy Saturday. It is a weekend, even though it is not a happy occasion to be meeting with you here if you're finding the show, but we are free and available everywhere, including YouTube, so just hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting us. Get a new episode in your feed all throughout the postseason and into the offseason and beyond. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by Nissan. We'll talk about them later on in the show. Are you the kind of the driver that likes to push things a little bit further? We'll take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada. Go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at NissanUSA.com. 126-109 was the final score. Look, there's not a lot of game plan stuff to really focus on here. So we'll talk about why the Suns lost this game, and then we'll talk about why this series has been so lopsided before we get into some finer details to close out the show. But why the Suns lost this game, I mean, in specifics, it was another third quarter run, right? 12-2 run in about 2 minutes time, from about 8.5 to about 6.5 minutes in that third quarter. All of it came on threes, 4 3-pointers in a row by the Wolves, Conley, Towns, and then 2 from Alexander Walker. 1 a pull-up, 1 a catch-and-shoot corner 3. And the Suns only put up 2 points in that time. That put the lead at 75-60. Never really got close again. Ended the third quarter up 22. Minnesota goes on to win by 17. More maybe broadly over the course of this game, Minnesota continued to solve Phoenix's defense. You know, I think the most descriptive thing that was said post-game was from Beal, which was that they spent the first 2 games, the first, let's say, week of this series, basically, feeling decent about where their defense was, holding Minnesota to low point totals, and feeling like, hey, if we can get our offense running, then this is a series. And for the second time in 3 games, that didn't really pan out. And Minnesota scores 126 in a road game, and in a situation where you would typically think, hey, role players are going to be the home team's role players are going to be better, road team's role players are going to be worse. Well, Naz Reid had his best game of the series offensively. Nickeil Alexander-Walker kept it up, 16 points, 5 assists, so they combined for 29. And obviously Grayson Allen being out doesn't help the Suns' role player situation, and Eric Gordon had a decent first half, but the Suns only get I guess they get 30 points off the bench, but 8 of that came from Okogie, who didn't play until the very end. And it wasn't enough. The Wolves, and in particular Ant Edwards, have just solved every single thing that the Suns defensively have thrown at them, right? We don't even have to go backward in time. Just take this game. The Phoenix tried a variety of things against Edwards in the first quarter alone. We saw them basically blitz him in the pick and roll, where the guy defending the screener and the guy defending him push him out toward the half-court line, force the ball out of his hands. We saw straight-up switches, make him beat you one-on-one. We saw switch and doubles, where the first ball screen that Ant got, the Suns would switch that, and then they would send a double team from somebody nearby. Basically, again, kind of taking some time off the clock, forcing the ball out of his hands, forcing him to make the right decision. And at the end of the day, decently high turnover game for him, but 36 points, 50+% shooting, and 5 assists, even though he did have the 5 turnovers, plus 19 in 43 minutes. As a result of them then needing to play a little bit more aggressively against Edwards, as we saw often in Game 2 especially, where they're putting 2 to the ball almost every single time and going out of their way to send more bodies toward Edwards. Conley's been able to step up routinely. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been able to step up routinely. Both of those guys in basically secondary ball handling roles. And today they combined for 31 and 12 with only 4 turnovers on 7 of 17 shooting from deep, just those 2 alone. You sprinkle in Karl Anthony Towns taking advantage of his matchup against Royce O'Neal. I thought the Suns actually held up a little bit better defensively early in this game than they had been lately, but they still go down. I think it was 17-8, 17-9. Durant has a couple of rim protection plays. Nurkic has one on a pick and roll. And it doesn't really matter. The Wolves solve it. They get Towns going downhill against O'Neal. They use Towns as a shooter and as a passer a little bit. He makes 3 threes, has 2 assists. And this game gets out of hand in that third quarter. The Suns offensively have never given themselves a chance in this series. But as I've said multiple times throughout the week here, the reason that it's been so ugly and so lopsided is because their defense has not even been able to limit a team that ranked middle of the pack on the offensive end over the course of the season. Had 2 All-Stars, All-NBA, probably second team, Anthony Edwards, and was still 16th in the regular season in offense. The Suns' inability to quiet that group that was pretty mediocre in the regular season down as a defensive unit in this series is why you've seen blowout after blowout after blowout. Yet, Minnesota continues to win on the margins as well. The rebound battle, the three-point battle, a lot of the little things are going the Wolves' way as well. So let's zoom out and talk about why the series is the way that it is and why the way that the Suns imagined it going has just not come to fruition. Coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by Nissan. That's right. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capability to take your adventure to the next level. Starting with the 2024 Nissan Rogue, perfect for city drives and great escapes with classic exclusive Google built in. Your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system, all combining to make the 2024 Rogue the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. In addition, the 2024 Pathfinder, Nissan Pathfinder, has room up to 8, expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capability, and 284 horsepower with up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's show, guys, also brought to you by Betterhelp. Unfortunately, good timing here. Sometimes we all have things that we need to get off of our chest. Sometimes it just helps to have a separate person outside your life who you can confide in, who you can get things that are heavy and heated out of your head, digest them, process them a little bit better. And I'm going to tell you today about something that I'm feeling this week about the Phoenix Suns, which is the annual spring disappointment, embarrassment and let down, right? It's just a team we all care about, we all follow all season long, and for 3 years now, it has ended in disappointing fashion on a home court with a lackluster effort, and that sucks. But look, therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month and try it out yourself. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Keeping the show rolling. Okay, so game 3 here. Another third quarter run. Anthony Edwards solving coverages. Other guys stepping up. Towns filling in the gaps. But here's the deal, right? So Minnesota gets 15 offensive rebounds tonight. They also, in the competitive part of the game, right, take out the Josh Okogie 3, take out a couple from Beal. For most of this game, Minnesota was far and away in the driver's seat in terms of three-point effectiveness. They actually did turn the ball over more than the Suns in this game, although I would say that in a couple spots, the Suns still did have some inopportune turnovers. Free throws, the Suns have actually been pretty solid in this game, especially from that first quarter where they were 14 of 15. It's kind of worked out. The Suns also started this game 0 of 5 in the paint, ended up 15 of 22 at the rim, which is one of their better games this series, but they were 6 of 18 from floater range, that short mid-range area. So their inability to finish inside, to get the ball into the basket in the paint, has been a consistent problem as well. The reason I list off all of these smaller parts of the game that the Suns have been on the wrong side of is to point out something. I guess you could say it's the worst part. I don't know. The Suns have not given themselves a chance in this series to play a close game. Part of that is the third quarter letdowns every single game, the mental mistakes, the lack of fight. In theory, there could have been a fourth quarter run after Minnesota's third quarter run in some of these games, but that hasn't happened. So yeah, some of it is big picture, but in these granular ways where Minnesota is able to continue to keep owning these games, the glass, three-point margin, turnovers, the Suns have not even given themselves a chance to have crunch time, to outduel this team that they're supposed to have more shot-making weapons than, right? They haven't even had that chance to show it. That was the idea with this Suns team, right? This series is unraveling a lot of things that we thought here. As I said countless times during the course of the regular season, the way this roster was set up, right? The point was find ways to put as much size on the court as you can, which was always going to be a little bit of a struggle, right? Execute on defense with a coach who can scheme that up for you and then outscore every opponent you come across. Have an answer for every defense that you face. And if you get into close game situations, especially in the playoffs, ride your all-NBA caliber guys who routinely over their careers have averaged 25 plus per game and win. A lot of that's falling apart, right? Because, well, I think the pretense of being able to put enough size on the court and facing a matchup that I think we underestimated the physicality, the forcefulness of in Minnesota is making that part hard. The defensive scheming, maybe obvious, there's obviously strategy going on there, but the players aren't able to execute it, largely because they're just not capable. Yusuf Nurkic having to be in this mode where he's stretched out onto the perimeter against Anthony Edwards is unreasonable. It's not working. These guys who are having to contain closeouts, we can criticize their positioning, their stance, their effort, and that's all valid. But I would bet you 9 times out of 10, Jaden McDaniels is going to be able to get downhill against Devin Booker if there's a lot of space there and he's playing well and he's confident. It's not a huge surprise. And their offense has come up against a team and a scheme and an intensity level that is not even allowing it to get off the ground. So everything's it's a bunch of unchecked boxes there. That checklist is not applicable to this series. And I think obviously bigger than all of that, or I guess maybe a result of all of that, is the Suns don't have the best players on the court right now. Maybe it's just because they're not clicking together as well as the Wolves are. Maybe it's because, in the case of somebody like Durant, potentially they ran out of gas. I mean, there's obviously always reasons and explanations and excuses. But Anthony Edwards has been the best player on the court in this series. I think you would say Rudy Gobert has been second. Maybe then you make a case for a Suns player. I would probably put Mike Conley there, if I'm being honest. Jaden McDaniels was pretty quiet on the offensive end tonight after a big game too, but he's been pretty damn impactful on the defensive end. Towns has had pockets. He's probably not on that list. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been pretty consistently good on both ends of the court. The Suns haven't had anybody you could say that about. So they don't even have the star power against a team that is less experienced than they are in terms of age and playoff games played and any of that. And I just think at the end of the day, you're seeing like Minnesota won 56 games, the Suns won 49, And the Wolves have weaknesses. I even think we've seen them get exploited, right? In the second quarters of games 2 and 3, there were lulls where Minnesota was not scoring. Suns haven't been able to take advantage of it. Sometimes these teams, we get tied in a pretzel evaluating and analyzing the matchups and the game-to-game. Largely, teams are who they are. Their strengths are their strengths. Their weaknesses are their weaknesses. A lot of the time, how they got there in the regular season is still going to work in the playoffs. That's that. The Suns are in this position because their plan was faulty. Not the point guard thing. I truly don't believe that. not the way they built the roster. You know, you're talking about instead of Bradley Beal, you want a mid-level exception. The best guy that signed a mid-level last year, probably Donte DiVincenzo. Now, he probably was going to the Knicks anyway, but let's say the Suns get him. They cut Chris Paul. They have dead money. They stretch him, do whatever. No Bradley Beal trade. Donte DiVincenzo is all you're getting back. Donte DiVincenzo, and I guess you keep Landry Shamet. Maybe you flip him for something not very good. You have your picks. Those probably weren't going to help you tonight. Did the picks perform? For Minnesota doesn't have their picks. Doesn't seem to, you know, it's not a valid part of how Game 3 went. It's not a valid part of how this series has gone. So, you know, if you think somebody like Donte DiVincenzo and Landry Shamet are changing the fate of this series, I'll hear your argument. I don't think that would have been the case. So, the plan didn't work in terms of they're running up against a machine that is just better than their machine and is able to stifle what was supposed to be the Suns' strengths. Closing out the show, let's talk about the reaction, the mood, the temperament coming off of this one. What was good about it, what was bad about it as we near the end of the season, and some difficult decisions. We'll get into all of that briefly coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, one of my favorite sponsors, as I'm a direct beneficiary of LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for your role, which is why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn Jobs is not just a job board. It helps you hire professionals you cannot find anywhere else, even people who might not be actively searching for a new job. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. They're all there just for you. That would be me. I'm not familiar with a bunch of other places to look for jobs. In my particular industry, in this sports media world, a lot of it happens on LinkedIn or even on Twitter or just kind of through networking, so I'm tending to spend my time there. I was able to find a posting I didn't know was even going to be there, link up with the hiring manager, get an interview set up. I knew I was qualified. They knew I was qualified. I was liking all of the benefits and salary situation that was there, and it worked out. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Become one of the 2.5 million small businesses using LinkedIn for hiring. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Closing out the show. Okay, so we have a lot of time to get into the right and wrong of the season at a macro level and blame and who's going to take that blame in the form of losing their job or getting, traded or whatever. Role change, all that. We're going to talk about it. Look, I'm going to keep doing this podcast for you guys every day until after Summer League. So we got time. I'm not going to go too deep on that. What I will go deep on is tonight, right? So, again, I thought the Suns' defensive intensity early in this game was decent. They started 0-5 in the paint. Maybe you could talk about that being a mindset problem as well. I think there's some validity to that in terms of how worried they have been. If you maybe want to use the word scared, I wouldn't blame you, of Rudy Gobert. He's in their head a little bit with some of those shots, but look, I'm not going to say the Suns came out flat or didn't care or didn't do any of that. I think they did. But because of all those little things I mentioned, they end up down 17 to 8. And then I believe somebody split a pair of free throws to make it 17-9. And they're right back in the hole they were in from the beginning. Now they have a little bit of resilience, get to the free throw line, get the Wolves in the bonus, end up scoring 32 points in the quarter. They hold a lead most of the second quarter, and then Minnesota goes on a run to close out the first half. Like 8-0, 6-0 type of run. But it felt kind of big in that moment, right? Because, again, as I mentioned in that last segment, there have been these spaces where the Wolves go into an offensive lull. They had 2 huge quarters in this game, but the middle 2 quarters, well, they had 3 huge quarters, I guess, but the second quarter they scored 25 points. that's an opportunity, right? If the Suns had scored 32 again in the second like they did in the first, they would have gone into halftime up 5. Instead, they go into halftime down 6. And you know the third quarter has been an issue. You know the Wolves have kind of won the long game. And that happened again. So, is that a mindset problem? Is that a mentality problem? Is that an execution problem? I mean, it's all of the above, obviously. You don't get smacked in the face 3 straight times in a playoff series that you were kind of favored in for just one tiny little reason. It's all of it. But I think where I come down at the end of the day here is these guys don't hate each other. Is there a lack of maybe an in-your-face, rah-rah type of leadership? And that usually comes in multiple forms, multiple people on a team, right? There's maybe like the vet. I think Eric Gordon has been that at times for this group, not consistently. He's probably not impactful enough to have that respect, hasn't been around these guys long enough to have that respect, so hasn't been consistent. There's sometimes kind of the FU guy on a team, right? In this team, it's probably Nurkic, but again, you know, when he has weaknesses as a player, how much can he really be that? And then I think there has to be some kind of star setting the tone there. So yeah, that's a problem. Is there a little bit, I think, under the surface here, some disagreement on how this team should be playing? Yeah, I think that's become pretty obvious if you listen and read what these guys have been saying, guys being the players as well as Vogel, right? You know, you hear somebody like Durant kind of expressing frustration about how thin the defense that they're playing is getting stretched because they're sending so much attention toward Anthony Edwards off screens versus the coaching staff putting together that game plan. Offensively, you know, I think the disagreement over kind of mismatch hunting versus playing faster has come to the surface. There was a quote going around that Sam Cooper from the Timeline podcast tweeted from Kevin Young's introductory press conference at BYU, where he said, you know, his preferred method of offense is sort of a spread it out, you know, move the ball, get up a lot of threes type of offensive approach, and this team's not playing that way. And he said, you know, Durant and Booker, they are guys that thrive in the mid-range, so that's how we've played. But my philosophy is X, Y, and Z in a more, you know, Boston Celtics type of approach. So all those things are there, right? The leadership probably not consistent enough. Chemistry's not quite there. Booker's talked about falling kind of, not falling apart in like that extreme sense of the word, but falling apart in the more literal way, literally falling away from one another rather than coming together when there's difficult moments. That's there. Different opinions about the best way to execute and approach this series or just how to win with this roster. That's there. But I don't think this is some kind of mega collapse. It feels kind of like the on-court stuff that I was just talking about. It's just everything that was there. It's just everything that's been staring us in the face. Teams are who they are. You know? There's not a guy in there when the going gets tough in the middle of those. And Vogel called timeout after timeout. The dude went into the fourth quarter with 2 timeouts. Okay? He emptied the holster. They played different guys out there in this game. Part of that because Allen was out. They tried different schemes. Would it help to have somebody in that moment who's kind of has the respect and has earned it from the other players on the team? Yeah, that would help. Would it help to have had more chemistry and not have to be deciding on the fly the best way to play, but have kind of learned the best way to play over trial and error and successes and failures over time? Yes, that would be helpful. All of it would and could be better in a different world. Maybe somebody's job is going to get lost anyway. The talent is still there. That none of that is an excuse. These guys are vets. They knew what the deal was. And it hasn't been good enough. But I actually don't think it's some travesty, blow it up, embarrassment, whatever. I think this thing was put together hastily. Maybe it didn't make the most sense in the world. And there were significant limitations to what the roster ended up looking like all along. They've run up against a better team, a more mentally tough and physically tough team, a team that's played together longer, a team that has a better game plan that's working for its personnel. And that's how you lose. NBA playoffs. Not always that complicated. That'll wrap us up. One more episode coming this week. Well, Sunday evening into Monday morning for you, I guess, kicking off next week. So hit follow or subscribe to get that show in your feed on Sunday night, and many more throughout what should be a pretty interesting next couple of months for the Phoenix Suns. They always keep it interesting, don't they? Yes. All right. That'll wrap it up. Talk to you guys Sunday. Enjoy the weekend. Goodbye.